So just a little bit about communication, as much as we know. It was assumed until a couple of years ago that bees don't have ears and that they all function through vibration and pheromones. But now they've discovered that there are some nerves at the end of the antenna that they think are ears. And I think that was discovered by the University of Minnesota. And so as they have these microscopes that can get even, give us even more resolution, they're finding more and more, that they're able to message an entire colony within seconds. So all you have to do is go out there without a bee suit, open up the beehive and drop a tool on the top, and you'll see how quickly the whole hive can come to action. Not always, that's an exaggeration, but they can message a hive within seconds. And it's through a lot of the pheromones. There's an alarm pheromone that the worker bees give off and tells the other bees that there's something wrong here. Get ready to attack or to drive off if it's bothering them. And the buzzing intensity also. So if you open up a hive that you haven't smoked and you're a little clumsy and drop something, and you'll hear the intensity of the buzzing increase. So that sends a message to them also that something's wrong. And then they can do, their communication system is so acute that they can tell other bees the direction and distance of the things that they're seeking. So if they find a good nectar source, enough bees come back and they do this little dance on the combs or on the surface of some combs or bees that are dense in there. They do this little dance called a waggle dance. It's like almost like a circle, except they come down through the center. So I probably should have a slide that shows that, but they circle up and then they go, they waggle themselves down through the center of the circle, come around, waggle themselves through the center of the circle. And so the line that's in the center of the circle is the direction to the source that they're trying to recruit other bees to go to in relation to the sun. So the other bees can detect and can determine exactly the direction to the source by the line that runs through the center of this circle that the bee is waggling through. The intensity of the waggling tells them just exactly how far it is, whether it's close or far away. And as you work with bees, you'll see them do that, particularly during strong nectar flow. If you open up the hive, you'll see the bees dancing. You know, if you see an observation hive someplace, you can watch them doing this little dance. And so the bees know what it is. The bee will be carrying the nectar that it's attempting them to find, so they know what they're going to look for. Now they know the distance and the direction, and away they go. It's the same for pollen or water, or a new nest site. If they swarm, and we'll talk about swarming a little later, the scout bees that go out to find a new home come back and dance the location of this new home on the outside of the swarm. And when enough scout bees dance the same location, the swarm picks up and leaves and goes to that new home. So the sap for propolis, and I haven't talked about that. Propolis is a substance that bees make from sap of trees. And a lot of it's made from cottonwoods here, and it's very hygienic. It has hydrogen peroxide in it and a mild antibiotic. And so the bees eventually pretty much coat the entire inside of the hive with that because it's so hygienic. And they use it to seal all cracks and seal everything together in the hive. And so that's one of the reasons you can put a hive out here in these Kansas winds and they don't fly apart all the time. Of course, we always put some kind of weight on top here, a little weight on top, but the propolis is very hygienic. They even coat the inside of some of the, in the brood chamber, they'll coat the inside of the cells where the babies are born, where the eggs are laid, with it because it's so hygienic. And you can sell the propolis, you can harvest it if you want to. It's quite a job. It's very sticky. And when you get it on your clothes, it doesn't wash out. So as you start, don't make the mistake I did. And we had a brand new ceramic sink in the kitchen, and I went in and cleaned my hive tool and brush in the sink, stained the sink. It's still stained about 5 years later. So and it will stain. It doesn't look all that great, but it is. Has a high value. You can sell it. At one time, it was selling for about $32 an ounce for this year's to the current year's propolis. But there aren't many people that buy it any longer either. So, location and communication is acute. The life cycle of a bee, just pay attention to that top curve if you would now. We'll get into the others later. But again, in the winter time, the population is down. So at this point, we're probably in about here, toward the end of the winter, toward spring. The population of the beehive is at its minimum. And then to begin the buildup of bees to reach its peak up here about the 1st of July or so, has to do with the solstice. The queen begins really laying eggs at a fast rate here. And so the population increases about the 1st of July or so. It varies hive to hive by a few weeks, but generally about the same time. And then the queen will begin laying fewer and fewer eggs. Excuse my shaking. I have Parkinson's disease, so my light's not very steady here. So the hive population begins to fall off, so that you're back down in the winter to the minimal amount of the hive to take care of and feed. Not as many bees to feed through the winter, and it won't consume all the resources. If you had 60,000 bees, you'd have to have a stack of honey kept down there to keep them going through the winter. So that's generally the population flow of bees. And we'll get into some of the problems that these other things like the varroa mite cause. And the varroa mite carries about 27 different known viruses now also. So in addition to the fact that it's taking some of the lipids out of the bee, and it also passes on all these viruses. So we'll get into that later, but that's the standard rhythm of a beehive, year after year after year. Swarming. So it's the natural means of expansion. The European honeybee was not here in the United States when the Pilgrims got here, and so it's a new, relatively new, as the age of the world goes, very new addition to our continent. But they were brought over. Some European honeybees were brought over about that time, and they expanded all the way to California long before Westerners were in California. And they did that by swarming. The natural home of a bee is usually a hollow tree, and so they'll build a hive in there, and in the first year they will flourish, maybe a couple years, but all of a sudden they expand to the point where they can't fit in there very well anymore. And so nature takes its course and they begin to swarm. So in a swarm, and usually it's caused by congestion, not always. Some queens will have alleles or have DNA that will cause them to swarm more often. African bees swarm all the time. I mean, that's probably one of the ways they cope with the varroa mites. But so half of the bees approximately depart with the existing queen. I guess they count off 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I don't know. But it's amazing to watch. I've stood right in the middle of them. They fill up with honey before they go, so that swarm is pretty docile. They won't sting you unless you happen to put your hand in there with the wrong colored glove on, like I did one time. But they usually won't sting you. They're very docile because they don't have a hive to protect, and they don't have, and they're full of honey. So they fly out usually to a bivouac area. So this thing is hanging on a tree. And so you may have seen some. You may have mistaken a swarm for a bunch of leaves in a tree. But they'll hang up on a tree limb or a fence or I've taken them off of picnic tables and cars and just some place they'll settle and send out scout bees to look for a new home. And so when the scout bee finds a new home and comes back and dances it, and enough of other scout bees come back and dance that same location, and it appears overwhelmingly to the bees that they found a good home, then they'll all lift up and take off. It looks like a pickup-sized bunch of bees flying through the air. I think we saw one out at we were putting trees in out at the K-State Student Gardens one day, and we saw this swarm come over, actually twice. One went into our bee trap, one went into some old beehives you had in the garage out there. It was amazing to see that. You don't see that very often. But they'll find a home, and since they're full of honey, the first thing they'll do is begin to build wax. The worker bees can build wax. They have wax glands underneath their trigal plates in the abdomen, and usually the younger bees have that capability. They'll build wax right away, so the queen has a place to begin laying eggs, and so that they have sites to store honey and pollen for a viable hive, and they do that quickly. I mean, they can make wax in a hurry. So as I said, it's usually caused by overcrowding. There are other things that can cause it if there are too many mites or too many other vectors in the hive. They can abscond and leave and find a new home. You can reduce the tendency. What we normally do in the middle of March is on a nice day, without breaking the cluster, but if you open the beehive, in the winter the bees generally move up, and their cluster will move up as they consume honey. So by the middle of March, the bees most often will be in the upper box only. So what we do is take the bottom box that's now empty, full of comb, and reverse it so it's on top of those bees. It gives them the illusion, at least, or the fact is they have more space to move up now, so that may reduce the tendency for them to swarm. We'll be doing that before long. Well, we won't either because our bees are in California. But we do have some hives back here, and we'll do that probably about the middle of May, or middle of March on a good warm day. When you see these swarms, it's best to catch them as quickly as you can. They're pretty easy to catch, actually, depending on where they land. Usually if it's on a tree branch like this one that you can just cut off the bottom, you can just drop them into a box, and I think someone's going to talk about that a little bit later. You can put a box underneath them, cut the branch, put it into a box. One of these nucleus hives that we have here, or a wooden box, or if you don't have anything else, just find a cardboard box, put them in there, put a cover over them, make sure there's enough air in there because they're full of honey and they create a lot of heat, so there has to be some ventilation for them. And you can go put them in a new hive and start a new hive that way. And they're ready to go. It's a colony that's functioning, ready to function. Put them in a new hive and away they go. And so they will sometimes stay there for only a couple of hours. Other times they'll stay there for many days. But it's important to get them as fast as you possibly can. You don't want them to consume honey, a lot of honey, so they have plenty of it to build comb. So if you see one, give us a call, or give a beekeeper somewhere a call so that they can harvest that hive.